Good morning, folks. My name is Dustin Jones, and today we're going to be talking about how starting beats never and the implications for starting or increasing your physical activity levels. Like I said, my name is Dustin. I'm one of the older adult faculty members. And for me, I don't know about y'all, but for me, when I'm talking about increasing physical activity levels with a lot of the people that I work with, which a lot of the people I work with have low physical activity levels, could be categorized as sedentary or physically inactive, that these, numbers that we throw out of the physical activity guidelines, for example, of 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity of activity or 75 minutes a week of vigorous activity. Those numbers for the people I work with are extremely daunting and very far removed from what their current physical activity profile looks like. So when I have these conversations with individuals about increasing their physical activity levels, it can be rather intimidating for them. Veronica, at least you're on this call. I don't know how y'all feel about this, but it can be very overwhelming for a lot of people I work with. And so what I've been trying to dig into is where can we get the most juice from the squeeze, if you will? Are there certain milestones to hit? They're going to give us relatively more impact and benefit. And what does that mean for the individual that is having a very, very difficult time even imagining what, 75 minutes a week of physical activity looks like, or the one that's imagining what even 10,000 steps would look like in a day? It can be very daunting for many individuals. And so I want to highlight two really big publications that have come out within the past year that paint a very encouraging picture, I think, for a lot of people that we work with, especially around here with Ice Physio, right? We push this fitness forward approach and we're bringing fitness into everything about our sessions. And I think it's important for us to realize that fitness does not equate to a CrossFit gym or lifting a barbell or, attending a group class several times a week. Fitness is we're encouraging movement. We're encouraging high intensity. We're encouraging resistance training. And fitness forward is a spectrum. It's not a destination. And for a lot of people that we work with, we're trying to move them on that spectrum as opposed to reach the end goal, right? Of where fitness can take us. So the spectrum is really important. So I want to highlight some stats that I'm going to read these. So I make sure I get them accurately because they're pretty eye-opening of what can happen when we just start to increase physical activity levels. So there's two studies that I want to highlight. One was looking at measuring physical activity overall in individuals throughout the span of their life, going from younger adults to older adults, and what the implications that had on a whole host of different diagnoses, including the risk of all-cause mortality. And then another study that looked at step counts, so specifically step count and what different step count levels, and when we increase those levels, what that does for individuals. So the big theme out of both of these studies is the power of starting. So when you are relatively physically inactive or sedentary, if you take those first steps, that's some of the largest relative benefit that you can get from being active. I just want to repeat that because I feel like this is really important to say. When you start to increase your physical activity levels and you have previously been physically inactive, you are going to experience the largest relative benefit in your health from starting. Not necessarily hitting those threshold numbers, but from starting. So here's some of the stats. For many older adults, they're usually, 2,000, 3,000 steps per day, right? They're on average relatively low. If you are getting around 2,000 steps per day and you jump up to 4,000 steps per day, it is associated with a 36% lower risk of all-cause mortality. Interesting, right? If you get up to 7,000 steps, which is, I would say, significant for a lot of folks I work with, that risk of all-cause mortality reduction, it goes to 47%. So when you go from 4,000 to 7,000, you're jumping from a 36% lower risk profile to a 47% lower risk profile, which is amazing, right? 11%. Sorry, the sun is like right in my eyes here. That's a lot, but you got to 36% with 4,000 steps. That is amazing. When you also hit 7,000 steps, 38% lower risk of dementia, 28% lower risk of falls, 22% lower risk of depressive symptoms. So that's not to downplay that 7,000 step mark, but it's to really hype up, man, if you get someone to 4,000 steps, that is a huge, huge win for that individual. The other study that looked at just overall physical activity levels also pointed out that regardless of your past, regardless of your previous physical activity levels and what you knew is normal, if you increase your activity, go from physically inactive to active, that is a 22% lower risk of all cause mortality. And so it speaks to this notion that it's never too late. That regardless of what you've done in the past, it is what it is, right? But you can start today and there is going to be benefit. Consistently active individuals are going to see a greater benefit up to 40. But when you go from physically active to inactive, even if you have that long past, you're going to get a 22 lower risk of all cause mortality. That's significant, right? It ain't 40, but 22 is pretty amazing. And so both of these studies are just really highlighting that the most to gain from physical activity actually happens when we start, when we are in those kind of relatively lower physical activity levels or step counts, but you're going to get the most relative benefit. What good news for so many people I work with. Veronica's watching live now. She says, I agree. I have several patients that are intimidated by the guidelines. I've been trying to use the step counter with them because they seem to be more willing to engage in that over dedicated cardio. Yeah. And the number that Veronica brings up a really good point. And while we love step counts and step count goals, because it's highly sensitive in the sense that it is easy to change. They're really big numbers that people don't necessarily understand what they truly mean, but when they see that they have taken, 4, 5, 6,000 steps, like that feels like a lot. That feels like an accomplishment, right? Especially early on. And so it can be a great way to get some of those early wins. So with this data, what do we do with this, right? How do we have this inform our clinical practice? But most importantly, I think how we are guiding people on their health journey and trying to increase their physical activity levels. For me, and probably many of you all watching or listening right now, I think this puts an even higher price and higher emphasis on those that are currently sedentary or physically inactive. You have those individuals that are not moving, that if you can get them moving, even the slightest bit, maybe from 2,000 steps per day to 4,000 steps per day, you have a significant impact in their quality of life and their risk profile for a whole host of different conditions. And so when I'm working with someone, I'm not going to have, some arbitrary 10,000 step count goal or the 150 minutes a week of physical activity. I would love to get there for sure, but that is not on my mind initially. My mind is change, is more, is better. And by not a lot, if I can get that ball rolling of an increase in physical activity levels, I am getting relatively a huge benefit. Yes, I'm not going to stop there, but that is what I'm focused on. That greatest clinical impact is going to come from the initiation of the increase of physical activity in folks that are sedentary. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think it's important for us to emphasize that starting beats never. The title of this podcast. So many folks will think about their past and the decisions they've been making and what their life has looked like up to this point. And when you get into your 50s, 60s, 70s, and you've lived a life of maybe being physically inactive or sedentary, it's very easy to tell yourself, what's the point? Right? I've already been doing this. There's no way I can combat the decisions and the situations I've been in for decades. I've experienced that in a lot of the folks that I work with. What's the point? How can I overcome, 50, 60 years of being physically inactive? And the data would say otherwise, that you can initiate this physical activity. And if you go from your current behavior and then start to increase your activity levels, even up to 4,000 steps per day, you're going to get at least a 22% lower risk of all cause mortality, even considering what your activity profiles looked like previously. And so your past does not need to continue to haunt you, that you can overcome that. Initiation or starting is going to be never. And then number three, what was also highlighted within these two studies was the implications for older adults to continue to increase their activity levels. That yes, the relative impact was most when they were initially increasing and had relatively low activity levels. And it does start to level off as our physical activity increases. Like I mentioned, with the difference from 4,000 to 7,000 steps per day, is a what 36% reduction to a 47% reduction. So that slope starts to flatten off. But at no point for these older adults in these two studies did it completely plateau. It didn't flatten off. It didn't get to the point of, well, there's no more benefit. What are we doing here? We're just wasting our time. No, it continued to show reduction in risk of a lot of these different conditions. It did level off, but it was still there. And so what these two articles spoke to is this kind of no plateau rule for older adults, that we want to continue to encourage the increases in physical activity. And I think this is important. I want that to be clear about this whole conversation, is that I don't want y'all to walk away with thinking that I'm advocating to just get someone to 4,000 steps per day. No, we need to get there and be a primary goal, and just increasing their physical activity levels. But we just don't stop there. It's not like our work is done, right? There's still so much more to gain, and we're going to continue to progress and increase. Just like how we would think about resistance training. It's not like we're going to get to a certain weight or percentage of a 1RM and say, all right, we're good to go. No, we're going to continue to load that thing up. We may progress from a dumbbell or kettlebell like we've been using, maybe go to a barbell where we can load it up even more and continue to hit some of those numbers with a deadlift, for example, right? We don't stop. We're continuing to progress, but man, we put a high price on getting that initial increase because we can see so much change. So that's all I've got for y'all. I want you to think about that. And I want you to think about some of the people that you work with and how we may want to shift our mindset and really emphasize some of those early jumps and really celebrate those, and know that that person is making a dramatic change in their risk profile for a lot of diseases and their quality of life, not to mention their confidence in their ability. We don't stop there. We're going to continue to encourage them and support them in whatever way we can to continue to increase that, but we don't need to sell short the benefits that can be gained early on. In the app, I'm going to drop these two studies, the PDFs, and I'll do a summary post as well on Instagram, just so y'all have some of these stats that you can use. We don't believe data is going to change a ton of behavior, but some of these numbers are pretty potent, and it doesn't hurt to have them. So check Instagram for that. I'll drop that link on the comments of this video as well within the Ice Physio app. Y'all have a lovely rest of your Wednesday. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll talk to y'all soon.